Hello and welcome back. Eddie Radosevich, George Stoia here from the SoonerScoop.com studios. Welcome back to the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel. Josh McCuistion back in Houston HQ, and the spring semester has begun. All of the transfers that Oklahoma has brought in, 15 of them have arrived to campus. John Mateer, I'm sure that a lot of people, if you're watching this, you probably took in a little bit of the social media that Oklahoma football put out from, I guess, a welcoming party, if you will, at Brent Venables' house.
We were not invited.
We were not invited. I don't think that it was because they didn't have space. That is a big home, and certainly a lot of stuff in there. But let's get into the transfer portal. Obviously, Oklahoma, let's just start here, George. It looks like everything is kind of done when we're talking about the start of the spring semester here. Maybe there's going to be some more guys that come up in the spring portal or possibly enter here over the next couple days from teams that are playing in the college football playoffs. But it seems like Oklahoma standing pat right now at 15.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about anybody else. I know Denver Harris, the former five-star cornerback, visited over the weekend. I don't have a great feel on that right now. I know Josh, maybe has a little bit more insight, but other than him, there hasn't been a lot of guys mentioned in terms of taking visits. Sterling Dixon, the linebacker from Alabama, ends up committing to NC State. I believe Jeff Roberson from Oklahoma State, the linebacker, he committed to Minnesota.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think that you're looking at Oklahoma kind of shifting its focus to the spring portal window. Now, if anybody from Ohio State or Notre Dame, obviously Texas, I think will maybe have a couple guys enter over the next week. Some of those teams, Penn State as well. Maybe there's somebody OU checks out and tries to bring in and whatever. But classes started on Monday, and so if you're bringing somebody in, it's got to happen pretty quickly. So I do think that their focus will likely shift to the spring window with trying to add a corner. I think they want to add a linebacker as well, maybe a defensive tackle. Offensively, I don't know. Maybe if a running back comes along or a tight end, somebody that you just can't pass up, maybe they get involved.
And perhaps a situation that somebody goes through spring and decides, you know what, I'm just not going to get on the field. I want to get out of here. And then you have to start working the numbers a little bit.
Look, we don't know. Maybe staff changes still happen.
Sure.
I continue to say that, but that could go well into
reality.
February or March, where maybe DeMarco Murray gets a call from one of these NFL teams. The NFL cycle is always a little bit later. Maybe Joe John Finley gets a job somewhere else as a tight ends coach. We'll see, and that could always be a domino effect in terms of players jumping in the spring portal window.
I will also add that Owen Waffle, the defensive tackle from Michigan, he ended up committing to Penn State, I believe. So he is off the board for Oklahoma. Before we get into the guys that have already signed, committed, started attending classes in Norman, anything on Denver Harris from over the weekend, Josh?
Yeah, that was something that kind of came on late. And for, those that don't really make the connection, Denver Harris is a guy, was a five-star recruit, a big-time elite guy at a North Shore here in Houston. Originally signed with Texas A&M, was recruited, though, very heavily by Jay Valai when he was at Alabama. So I think that was kind of the obvious connection that Oklahoma had. Denver's bounced around a little bit. I mean, he had a year at A&M. There was some trouble there. Ended up at LSU. Didn't last very long there. And then really ended up at UTSA. And from what I can gather, kind of got back on track a little bit last year. I don't want to say he had a great year. I'm not going to say I watched a lot of UTSA film. But it sounded like things kind of normalized a little bit. My impression was that I think there was just some indecision on how he kind of fit in to this locker room, how he was going to be perceived. Because, guys, we know, I mean, Brent Venables and this staff, they've got a lot of opinions, a lot of beliefs about what makes a strong team, what makes a strong core. And I'm not sure with all the, it's one thing if you've got a lot returning and you know exactly kind of what your team is to kind of bring a guy in and say, okay, we've got leadership here that's going to bring him in line. Like maybe last year with Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman. But this year where you kind of have a vacuum of leadership amongst your players at this point, I wonder if that was kind of a risk where they said, we don't know what if we want to bring that in. And again, Denver may have figured it all out. It may be fine. Now, I think it's probably just a risk that maybe OU didn't feel they needed to take.
Probably a stupid question coming from me, but when you're talking about the guys that are already on campus and the 15 guys that they brought in through the transfer portal, does that conversation begin with John Mateer? I mean, is that the first name that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think so. And it's early. They had their first workouts. I think they're kind of doing like almost like a combine testing this week for a lot of the players.
Dominated.
I heard that he
Heisman
had a pretty good first day.
Heisman Trophy. So you're confirmed.
I'm not
confirming
saying that,
there's
Eddie,
a possibility he might be in New York City is what you're telling me.
No, but I do think that he's a little bit maybe better athlete than some might realize. We obviously saw that this year with him and his ability to use his legs. It also just sounds like he's already taken over a leadership role in that locker room. Now, that's going to progress over time, right?
Sure.
Like, that's going to take some time. But
Need to get on the field, all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
but like it sounds like he's been kind of a leader so far since getting onto campus. I think at Brent's house and in the welcome party, he was clearly a guy that people gravitated towards. So, yeah, I think it all goes through John Mateer, and we'll see. Look, he's going to have a great year for Oklahoma to be successful. So, it's going to be really interesting, his pairing with Ben Arbuckle. But I'm also just interested in what you guys think about some of these other guys, because I feel like we've talked so much about John Mateer.
Sure.
Not that we know what OU's getting in John Mateer exactly, but I think we have a pretty good feeling of how, I think he was rated by On3 as the #1 impact player, in the portal, out of the portal, that Oklahoma landed. So obviously it's huge, but I'm more interested, who are some of these other guys of the 15 that could be immediate, either contributors or even starters?
Kind of turned to the wide receiver position, Josh. I mean, you bring in 4 guys in, Giovanni Gibson, the interesting, I guess, prospect coming out of Arkansas Pine Bluff, Keontez Lewis, the Southern Illinois wide receiver, Isaiah Satania from Arkansas, and then Josiah Martin from Cal. I guess to me, it would be Gibson just because of the size, the attributes that you saw on tape this year from lesser competition, but how does that line up? What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, Gibson's the guy I'm a little bit enamored with. And guys, for those, like you said, Eddie, leading in, there's been a lot of social media work. We've seen Emmett Jones tweet out some pictures, and Giovanni Gibson, like you see him, and I know how big like Manny Choice is, and I can see him, and you're like, oh wow, this guy's large. This isn't just a listing from a small school or somebody kind of inflating the numbers. That's a big guy. You can tell it in those pictures. And I think he's incredibly interesting. I also, I think Isaiah Satania, like when you look at what he can do in the return game, he brings some speed so that, if you get him and Deion Burks on the field at the same time, it's very tough to say, okay, we're just going to put our safety over the top. If we're playing single high, you can't maybe you just can't play single high if Satania and Burks are out there, because you have so much speed to challenge vertically that if a corner's off, anything's not quite right, I think there's some big plays to be made there. And obviously John Mateer having a quarterback that I think, to be frank, has the confidence to pull that trigger and make some of those downfield throws. I think there's some good stuff there. I mean, I know there's a lot of guys we can talk about, but those two really stand out to me. And I will say, George, you were talking about some of the testing stuff. I heard Keontez Lewis put up some pretty decent numbers in some of the stuff, so I thought that was a good start for him.
Look, I think the receiver room is an interesting one because I think all 4 guys are a little bit different. I think Josiah Martin's kind of a developmental guy, only a true freshman, so I don't know how much he'll be on the field next year, but somebody that they feel like they could maybe mold and turn into a player eventually. Giovanni Gibson, I think he has the highest ceiling when you look at his attributes and obviously the production that he had last year. I know it was a lower level, but if you told me next year he was a breakout star, I'd believe you. If you told me next year he didn't contribute, I'd also believe you. Like, I think that it could go either way with him. Keontez Lewis is the guy that I think could just be a really solid player. And I can't remember, Josh, if it was you or somebody else. I think he could have a similar role as like Geno Lewis did. That's a throwback name, but Geno Lewis,
serviceable for sure.
Yeah, was that 2014, 2013? Something
I want
like
to say
that.
13, 14, right around in that.
Maybe 20. It might have been 2015.
No, I think it would have been
No,
after.
it was Riley era, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say it might have been
2015.
15, 16, something like
Yeah,
that.
so but it's somebody like that who is just kind of a solid player. You know what you get from him every single down. And then Isaiah Satania, I think, is that versatile type receiver. Like Josh said, he can be a deep ball guy. He can return kicks. He can do kind of a little bit of everything for you.
You know, you see the number 4 coming in. Obviously, that's the most at any position that they brought in from the transfer portal. It's more so, in my opinion, about a marriage of, okay, how can you fit a Giovanni Gibson or an Isaiah Satania along with Jaden Gibson, hopefully coming back from the patellar injury that cost him the 2024 season. Deion Burks, obviously, you got to keep him healthy. What kind of development can you get out of Zion Ragan, Zion Kearney, Jacob Jordan even? It will be interesting to see. Like, I think that there's this thought like, oh, you need all 4 of these guys, and it would be great if they could contribute in 2025. You don't have to have all these guys contributing. You still need to develop some of the guys that are returning, correct?
I mean, really, you only need 1 or 2 of them to hit.
That was going to be my question. How many of these guys need to come in and give you contribution from day one when you hit the field next year against Illinois State?
Assuming Deion Burks is the dude that we think he can be, and then assuming that one of Zion Kearney, Ivan Carrion, and Zion Reagans can take another step, and then you need 1 or 2 of the portal guys, and you're looking at having a solid 4 or 5, and that's not even including, like you said, Jaden Gibson, which that's a tough injury to come back to. We'll see what he's like. But I think that you have to feel a little bit better. They gotta just stay healthy too at receiver, right? Like, that's
unprecedented, catastrophic injuries. It seemed from the get go this year with Jaden Gibson's injury.
Yeah, it was bad. So hopefully, if they can stay healthy, again, I still think Deion Burks is your guy. He's your go-to receiver if he can stay on the field.
Certainly, Ben Arbuckle's going to have some. A lot of different tools to use, you would imagine, once spring starts. The tight end position is interesting, and I want to get into that here in a second. But first, let us tell you about our good friends at William & Lauren. As the official custom clothier of OU football, William & Lauren outfits your favorite OU players in custom suits that boost their confidence off the field to match their confidence on the field. Their perfectly tailored clothing ensures every suitor stands out in comfort and style at prices that make luxury accessible. Visit William & Lauren in Oklahoma City or online at williamandlauren.com. That is williamandlauren.com. Dress like a champion and make your style as legendary as OU football. I'm sure a number of those guys, the incoming guys, the guys that just joined and starting their spring semester in Norman for the first time, they'll be headed up to Oklahoma City to visit William & Lauren to get their suits ready for next season.
Yeah, maybe Danny and Billy too might be getting ones for the draft or something.
That's a
like
good
that,
call.
It's
a good call. We'll be seeing those guys in the Senior Bowl. Billy Bowman for sure. I don't know what Danny's status is. He's not on the online roster. We need to check into that as Senior Bowl week approaches down in Mobile, Alabama. Let's talk about the tight ends. I know it's kind of a hot button issue right now with Oklahoma fans. I think that we all three are pretty aligned with how poorly we've thought things have gone on that position. But you do add 3. John Locke from Louisiana Tech is the latest. Will Huggins from Pittsburgh State. Carson Kent from Kennesaw State. You're marrying them with guys that are expected to return, whether it be a Devon Mitchell, Cade McIntyre, Caden Helms. I mean, you got, 7 guys there? You need 2 of these guys to do something, right? Can you get anything out of the tight end position in 2025? Ben Arbuckle, good luck.
I don't know.
Let's be positive.
Well, look, I think that they're putting a lot of their eggs in the Devon Mitchell basket, right? And so we'll just have to see how that plays out. And I do think that he will take a step. This was a good year for his development, maturity, all of that. Like, it's a good reminder that he was supposed to be in high school a year ago, so he should be ahead of the curve. Can he be that elite playmaker for them next year? I don't know. I do think he could probably find some sort of role. I think Cade McIntyre can still be a good football player, maybe even Caden Helms. Problem is those guys have a lot of injuries. And then you talk about the 3 guys that they've brought in. I'm not so sure who's on scholarship and who's not of those 3. I think Carson Kent is. The other 2, I have no idea. I think that those are cases of, hey, let's take a flyer and maybe one of them works out, or maybe, I've heard that the John Locke kid's supposed to be a great blocker. Maybe he can be in some different packages like that. It feels like, though, to me, Josh, that Carson Kent, if you're going to pick one of the 3 tight ends to be an actual contributor next year from the transfer portal, it feels like Carson Kent's the pick.
He's the one that makes the most sense. And, I know, again, we've talked about this a couple times. Everybody has this impression, air raid, there's no tight end. Like, don't do that. Like, he uses a tight end. He does. Now, at the same time, I was just doing the stats. Tight ends at Washington State last year had 8 catches for 108 yards. So it's not like it's a huge part. Like the offense can't function if the tight end's not highly productive. I'm not saying that, but they are on the field. They are going to be used as blockers. He uses them in zone insert. A lot of the stuff that you saw Oklahoma do last year, that can have a similar role. So I to me, this is okay. If one of the guys emerges, and I think we all agree, if it's going to be somebody, it's probably the guys that are returning. It's probably a Caden Helms. It's probably a Devon Mitchell. If one of those guys could really just step forward and say, not only can I be a good enough blocker, I'm a dangerous weapon in the passing game, and I can open up some things for the offense. Okay, great. But if not, then one of these 6, 7, I think it's 6, need to just be a very skilled blocker. Just be very good at that, and you can have this role. It's clearly there to be taken. But again, I mean, when I think I did the numbers when I did the under the hood for Ben Arbuckle, I want to say like 60, 65% of the time, they're at least an 11 personnel. So that they use a lot of tight ends. So there shouldn't be this idea that, well, they're just going to play 4 wide and that's what he wants to do. That's not my impression. So we'll watch it. Maybe it evolves over time. Maybe, they put some bigger receivers out there, Jaden Gibson and, Zion Kearney, or Jaden Gibson and Javonte Gibson. Wow, that's going to be complicated. But, you get some bigger receivers out there and they can do some things. Okay. But I do think one of these tight ends needs to emerge at least as a consistent blocker that, we know you didn't have last year. And frankly, really hasn't had the last 2 years, a guy that you could count on winning reasonable battles. I'm not going to hold against Bauer Sharp that he couldn't block South Carolina's edges. That's unrealistic. But even just battles that you should win, you need a tight end that can win those consistently for Oklahoma.
George, you put together a projected 2 deep on, I guess that would have been Monday. And we were sitting around in the office. You were trying to come up with, who's going to be where. And talking about the offensive line, you have 2 guys coming in, Derek Simmons, Luke Belenko, Western Carolina, and Stanford, obviously. Josh, I don't know if you had a chance to check it out. It was very, I guess, kind of interesting because there are some guys like a Jacob Sexton or a Jake Taylor coming back. Like, where do you put all these guys when you start working together with a 2 deep?
Like we've talked about, guys, this is, to me, what I see is a good problem.
Yeah.
Whatever else we don't know about Oklahoma at offensive tackle, there are enough good bodies here that they should be able to put 2 quality players out there. Now, I do want to say, and I can't remember if we've covered this or not, but obviously the news that Logan Howland has had some sort of shoulder surgery, that's tough because if there's anything on earth Logan needed, it was the winter to get bigger, to get stronger, to put some weight on, maybe get up into that 320 range, maybe a little bigger. Like, he's so big framed. I don't think you're going to throw a number at me that I'm going to balk at. Like, just get him bigger. So that's going to be tough. And obviously the training staff's got a challenge there of how do we put the mass on him that we need to while he's recovering. That's tricky. But again, like you talked about, Beck Linko's a 2-year starter from Stanford. He's played at the P4 level. Derek Simmons is a good player. I know he doesn't come from a program that everybody, looks to or respects or whatever, but he's a quality guy. Like, he can play ball. And then you throw in guys like Taylor, Sexton. I mean, then you get the 2 freshmen in Foje and Fasusi, Howland. There's a lot there to work with. I don't know how it's going to play out. The only thing I think Logan Howland's the starting left tackle. I feel pretty good about that. Right tackle, again, guys, like, if I'm Bill Bedenbaugh, I'm loving this. This is just like throwing meat out there and being like, who's going to go get it? Like, who wants that spot? Somebody come fight and take it. And, with Fasusi showing up already, and we've seen pictures, I don't think it was coincidence that he was one of the first videos we saw from any of the social media from OU football. So, I think they'd love for him to take it, but he's going to have to do a lot, and there's a long way to go from, I dominated Under Armour to I'm ready to start in the SEC as a freshman.
It's going to be really interesting, and like Josh said, it's a good problem to have. I mean, this is the most depth that I feel like Oklahoma has had across the offensive line in maybe a few years. Like, you've obviously had a lot of talent, whether it was Anton Harrison or Tyler Guyton, guys that were first-round draft picks. I don't know if you have that right now. I'm sure Michael Fasusi or Ryan Foje or some of these younger guys, maybe even, a Logan Allen, if he just has a massive, massive year, maybe they could turn into, first, second, third round draft picks. But you got to feel good about the guys coming back. I mean, I think we all thought that, one of Jacob Sexton or Jake Taylor would hit the portal. Now, they got to be healthy, right? But I think we all agree that when they're healthy, they're pretty good players. And you could play Sexton, obviously, at guard or tackle. I'm interested to see, I think I penciled him in at guard yesterday, but I also just didn't really know where he's going to play.
Sure.
If he's going to pop back out to tackle. He played both this year. Hito Zaida was really good at left guard to finish the season. Like, he really took some big steps, as well as Logan Howland. I think Eddie Pierre-Louis you're going to see next year. But in terms of the two guys they brought in, I think both of them are going to try and fight for starting jobs. I think I give Derek Simmons a little bit of an edge of getting on the field next year before Baklenko. But like Josh said, Baklenko's play, he was basically a 2-year starter for Stanford. Now, Stanford wasn't any good, but I think that he's somebody that they feel like can turn into a good player for him.
It would seem that, like, from a depth standpoint, the offensive line feels like it's in pretty good shape. Going into the spring is maybe priority number one outside of, like, who's going to be starting at right tackle. They got to figure out a backup center option.
Yes.
Is that probably the most pressing issue behind Troy Everett?
And Josh, I wanted to ask you this. Is there anybody that you could see them moving to center?
The two that come to mind, and it's a good possibility if these guys can put it together. We've talked a little bit about Eddie Pierre-Louis and how I think he could make some sense with some of the way they like to pull and move their centers, get those guys out into space. Eddie's athleticism plays to that perfectly, and it's not as big a deal that he's not 320 pounds. Like we know Troy Everett's not the biggest guy in the world, so you could kind of make that work. The other thing, and I had never considered it until last weekend, guys, Ryan Foje looked pretty serviceable in the Navy All-American Bowl, playing a lot of center in that game. So again, and that was a complete the center that was in the game, he got hurt during the week, and so they had to kind of put him out there as just we've got to make this work a little bit. And I thought he did a pretty serviceable job considering, he'd only been working at the position for a few days. And I know Ryan's a really sharp, really smart guy. I don't think that's his best future. But, like, if you wanted to cross-train him a little bit and say, hey, let's just see what this looks like. Let's see how this goes. I wouldn't object to it. I mean, because that's a guy that, again, you talk about having every tool you could ever want. That's the guy. I mean, Ryan Foje would be incredible. Now, I think his future's at tackle, so I don't want people to misread that I'm saying everything should be thrown out the window because of a couple snaps in San Antonio. But I think it's an interesting possibility. And then I think you go down the road of some of the guys that we've talked about before, Josh Iasosa and names like that.
It will be interesting also to see, you have 11 of the 15 guys are on offense. You got the two specialists who I think George wants to coin them the Kennesaw Kicking Kids, KKK, which I thought was a little bit over the top.
I did not say that.
Two of the other guys, though, on the defensive side of the ball, Kendall Daniels, obviously coming in from Oklahoma State, Marvin Jones Jr. from Florida State. Did we not make a big enough deal about those additions to a defense that we already feel like on paper is going to be borderline elite, extremely good?
I think,
like, when we look back on it and go, God, that was huge that they were able to get a Marvin Jones Jr., who we were talking yesterday, I think probably comes in and starts next year.
I think so too. I think that he obviously has all the measurables. I think that you can still get more out of him. Obviously, he hasn't had the type of career that maybe some projected him to have when he came out of high school, but I think all the tools are there. So I'm interested to see if he's a starter. I still think Taylor Wine is a guy that could come in and play quite a bit for Oklahoma next year. PJ Adebawore, if he can get healthy, I think could have a big year. Danny Okoye. But Marvin Jones Jr. being experienced, being on the opposite edge of R. Mason Thomas, I mean, that's elite. I mean, that's two elite guys that you've got on your edge, especially, late game situations, third downs, second and longs, whatever it is. Those are your two guys, I feel like, at defensive end. And then Kendall Daniels, like, I'm interested to see just where they play him. We're talking yesterday about, could he go play cheetah? Could he play inside linebacker? He played inside linebacker this last year for OSU and wasn't the best at it, but I wonder, with Brent Venables teaching him and whoever they hire as the linebackers coach, maybe the light bulb comes on for him. But I think these are two guys that are going to play a lot for Oklahoma next year.
Josh, what do you think?
Well, guys, there's a part of me, and maybe it's just my unfailing belief in PJ Adebawore, that it's kind of like what I was just saying at right tackle, where it's like, PJ, we've got to bring this guy in. We haven't seen enough. We can't say that we can count on you. But hey, man, you want to go take that job, go take that job. Like, you know, like that kind of deal. And I think that's an interesting possibility. The crux of it is either way, whether it's PJ pushing Marvin or Marvin pushing PJ, you're going to get better play out of two tremendously talented guys. So I think that's a great starting point, and you kind of work from there. But, you know, again, like there is a part of me, guys, that is reminded, and I can't remember where I heard this, but someone said it, you know, like the same narrative that we're talking about with PJ right now is the exact same thing we talked about with R. Mason Thomas, like this time last year. Oh, you know, you hear good stuff and you see flashes of stuff, but man, he just can't stay healthy. And then finally, when it all came together for R. Mason Thomas, oh, he's one of the best defensive ends in the SEC. Okay, now does that mean that that's going to play that way? No. PJ's a very different player. There's a lot of different variables in that equation, but I do think that's interesting. With Kendall Daniels, kind of the same deal where what's the harm here? Like, what's the risk? Like, this just feels like okay, maybe he plays some cheetah. And I think, like we talked about last week, guys, he's so much more ready to play what Oklahoma expects the cheetah position to be than Dasan McCullough is. And that's no shot at Dasan McCullough. I think Dasan McCullough is like a stand-up 3-4 outside linebacker. And I think that's a perfect role for him, and he could be really good at, maybe an NFL guy at it. But he's not a guy that's comfortable dropping in coverage. He got much better, but that's not the way he goes. Kendall Daniels can turn and run. Like, this is a guy that played a ton of high school receiver, played safety early in his career at Oklahoma State. I mean, like, this is a guy that has a lot of variety in the way Oklahoma could use him. And again, we've talked about this for 3 years now, guys. If there's anybody in the country that can find ways to use unique players, it's Brent Venables. Like, he does amazing stuff creating defenses around guys that are kind of unique weapons that maybe other people would have overlooked. You know, the one that everybody points to always is Isaiah Simmons. I'm not making that comparison, but in a similar way, Kendall Daniels can be deployed in a lot of different ways that could be very dangerous for a defense, or excuse me, for an offense.
I'm pretty excited to see how all that comes together. Last but not least, you snuck it in, kind of. You had to read the two deep projections going into next season, but you know, you get into the spring and this time of the year, you start toying with some ideas on guys, maybe flip it on the other side of the ball, experimenting with different positions. Jaren Kanak possibly moving over to the offensive side of the football, play a little H-back this spring.
Yeah, it sounds like he's going to maybe go both ways this spring. That's at least what I've heard. Obviously, you know, he's played quite a bit at linebacker for Oklahoma the last couple of years. He was a starter in 2023 for about half the season before Kip Lewis kind of burst onto the scene for Oklahoma. But I think that Oklahoma wants to see if he can help them at H-back. And, you know, in Ben Arbuckle's offense, Josh was saying earlier, you know, the tight end position is not one that's, you know, super prevalent.
Ball carrier with the ball in his hands.
He was great in high school at carrying the football. So I think that they're looking at him as, I don't know about an inline tight end. Maybe he could do that. But something in the backfield to get him the ball, be a lead blocker. Like, I think that they think he could really excel at that. And I know at Washington State, they kind of had an H-back system. Like, they had somebody that was kind of that almost like a fullback tight end type player. And I think Kanak could do that. And I think that they also still want to keep him on defense a little bit because they're starting to get kind of thin at linebacker. You know, doing the two deep yesterday, you talk about Kobe McKenzie and Kip Lewis. You feel great about those two. After that, you know, you got Samuel Masiga, who I think is going to move back inside instead of playing cheetah next year. I think he's going to play more inside linebacker. And then it's kind of like, well, where's Kendall Daniels going to play? You know, is James Nesta, you know, a guy that's ready to play next year for Oklahoma? Is Taylor Heim somebody that could play? I don't know. I think they feel much better about Jaren Kanak being that backup Mike next year, or Kendall Daniels. Kendall Daniels could also play maybe the Mike, Omasigo as well. But you know, I think this spring they're just going to see what does it look like if he were to do some H-back for Oklahoma.
That interest you any, Josh?
I love that idea. And again, with a lot of the stuff, when you go back and watch Washington State, people are like, well, John Mateer is he's a scrambler. No, I mean, he is. but he really would rather sit back there and pass. But where he really excels is called runs. Like when you watch him and you having like a lead blocker, having somebody leading him out into space, I love that idea. And Jaren Kanak is a guy that we all know has the speed to get out on a safety, to do some of that stuff that a lot of H-backs just could not do. So I think that's an incredibly interesting possibility. And guys, I mean, let's be honest. Jaren Kanak has the crazy you need to play that position. Like, I mean, like when you're going to go again, like an insert, you might be getting onto a nose. You might be hitting a 250-pound mic. Like you can do all that stuff, and he's not going to hesitate for a moment. And it scares me, like George said, where you talk about the numbers at linebacker and just how rail thin they kind of are. But maybe you experiment with a little bit this spring and you say, okay, that kind of works. Maybe we move forward with this. And then you look in the portal and say, okay, we can find a linebacker or two here that can give us 10 snaps a game. You know, it doesn't have to be a superstar, but just a guy who can play a little ball for you and kind of buy some time until you can reinforce again, you know, this time next year.
It makes a lot more sense now that they were looking at some linebackers.
Sure.
When you talk about moving Kanak. So I think Josh is right. I think that there's definitely going to be an emphasis on trying to find somebody, a linebacker. One guy I wanted to mention, who was the guy at Iowa State that played both ways for Iowa State? Remember him?
That remember.
Played linebacker and he played like some quarterback, wildcat quarterback.
What was his name? God, he ended up playing quarterback.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
They'd bring him in some jumbo packages. Was it like Rose or something like that? I can't remember.
Not Mike Rose.
But all I know is
Joel Lanning.
Joel Lanning. That's it.
That's
good call, Josh.
Maybe Jaren Kanak could be the next Joel Lanning.
Wouldn't
that be awesome?
Let's be honest, a wet dream if that could happen. All right? That's going to do it for George Stoia, Josh McCuistion. I'm Eddie Radosevich. We'll see you right back here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube channel.